Rarely, I would say, have we planned a conference that was more timely than this one. And rarely did we have more reason to be concerned about Israel's future as now, as we're entering Israel's 75th year of independence. And Israel's recent election, in fact, the 25th in these 74 years, and the fifth in only 3.5 years, in my view, as a historian, were not just another election. They may have been, in historians in another generation might say that, but they may have been as decisive in signaling a shift in Israel, within Israel's society, as was the watershed election of 1977, which for the first time brought to power a right-wing government under Menachem Begin. The 2022 election, in turn, in my view, might likely be remembered for a government that has for the first time a majority of religious Orthodox party mandates among its Knesset supporters. These elections, the results constitute a serious challenge to the Israel that many of us know and cherish. The open-minded society, which is very proud to be the startup nation and the leader in the high-tech sector, a country with a thriving LGBTQ community, with a world-renowned art scene, and the home to some of the leading universities on the globe. There are admirable models of Jewish-Arab cooperation in Israel, and we had many of the representatives of this here. There are successful attempts of bridge building between secular and Orthodox in Israel. And in this Israel, a multifaceted media, an independent justice system, and a strong educational system are accepted as the gatekeepers of democracy. Sounds familiar here too, right? This Israel has received probably around 50% of the votes, but due to the electoral process, it had been reduced to a minority in the Knesset. The political earthquake of this November did not come as a surprise to those who have been watching Israel's demographic development over the last decades. In a country in which the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, have an average of 7 children, while secular Israelis have a little bit more than 2, we witness a rapid shift of population, which only, a rapid shift of the population, which only very few American observers seem to take note of. This is not so much a shift from the left to the right, but rather from secular to religious, and in fact, messianic. As for many radical Orthodox Jews, the secular right serves merely as a vehicle to enlarge in their power and perhaps ultimately to implement some form of theocracy. This is a message especially important to Americans and Americans who support Israel, because I think at some point we all will have to make up our mind of which Israel it is that we want to support in the future. There is a certain irony in the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu and his secular party colleagues love to be photographed under a portrait of the founder of political Zionism, Theodor Herzl, but at the same time declare an alliance with right-wing Orthodox parties, including an extremist like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was considered too extreme to even be allowed to serve in the Israeli army, and who displayed a portrait in his home of Baruch Goldstein, a terrorist who in 1994 murdered 29 Muslim worshippers in Hebron. If those people who refer to Herzl as the founder of their state would read the founding fathers' novel, Old New Land, written actually exactly 120 years ago, they will find that Herzl calls out one group that does not deserve a place in his imagined Jewish state. In his view, these were those fanatically religious Jews who do not grant equal rights to non-Jews. Herzl also predicted in this novel that those religious zealots will one day question the patriotism of the more inclusive and more liberal Zionists, and that they, Herzl says, will make us believe that we are the bad Jews, if not the strangers, in their Palestine. Herzl wrote these lines in 1902, but I think this is what many Israelis, including many who built this country, feel today. So there are many reasons to worry about the future of, I usually start on an optimistic note, I apologize. But I mean, there are many reasons to worry about the future of the only democracy in the Middle East. And it's the worry that the values of secular Israelis are in danger. It's about the principles of the separation of powers. There is the worry that Israel's Arab citizens are being further marginalized. There is the worry that the gap between a dominant Orthodox Judaism in Israel and dominant non-Orthodox American Jews will grow. There is the worry about a political divide between the Israeli and the US administration. And there is the worry that those who deny Israel's existence, that's also important, there's the worry that those who deny Israel's existence will find more arguments for their support. And I say this knowing all too well that this holds true also for our American university campuses. Of course, only the future will tell us what really will happen with this next government. And let us not forget that the future is shaped by what we, and especially, of course, Israelis, but also we here, decide to do and to act today. So tonight and tomorrow, we will discuss what all this means. And at the same time, I think it's very important, we will go deeper than just discussing the elections. We planned this conference long before the elections, you can imagine. We will ask the questions, how profound are the divides in Israeli society between right and left, between religious and secular, between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem? What about the 50% that did not vote for Netanyahu? What about the future of Israel's Arab citizens and about Israel's independent judiciary, about the freedom of expression, about the relations between Israel and US Jews? To lead us into this question, I am pleased to welcome Aluf Benn, the editor-in-chief of one of the watchdogs of Israel's democracy, Israel's longest-running daily newspaper, Haaretz, founded long before the State of Israel, founded in 1918. Aluf Benn has been its editor-in-chief since 2011. Having joined the paper in 1989, Benn held several positions in the newsroom, including investigative reporter, diplomatic correspondent, and analyst, and chief news editor. He holds an MBA degree from Northeastern University's Kellogg School of Management and Tel Aviv University's Rekanati School of Management. Aluf Benn will talk tonight about the November 22 elections and the future of Israeli democracy. And please join me in welcoming Aluf Benn.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks the center for holding this conference and inviting me, and everybody who came and everybody who's watching from afar. The November election. Well, we didn't know it when I was invited. We didn't know the outcome, and it's I think as Michael said, one of the most important watershed election in Israel's history. Although, you know, if one moment captures the change, is the fact that Channel 12, the main Israeli news channel on television, broadcast live from the memorial service of Rabbi Meir Kahane, which was unthinkable only 2 weeks ago. Why? Because the new rising star in Israeli politics, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the big winner of the election, happened to speak there and to discuss his relation with to the Kahane legacy, and that's primetime news in Israel today. Again, unthinkable, going back to the times when the Kahane movement was recognized as a terrorist group, both in Israel and in the United States. and now it's in the government with a strong force. I think that the process that we're witnessing today began in 2015. That was the real point of revolution in modern Israeli history, when Netanyahu won the election after coming back in 2009 and calling an early election because he didn't get along with his coalition partners. After 6 years in which he ruled the country quite conservatively, with coalition partners, relying on coalition partners from the center and the left, allowing Tzipi Livni to negotiate with Secretary John Kerry the two-state solution, proclaiming the Bar Ilan speech in 2009 to please President Obama and say Palestinian state for the first and I think the last time. And since then, by the way, the Likud, the largest party in Israel, the ruling party, has no official platform because Netanyahu never dared to bring the Bar Ilan speech to any vote in any body, any political body or government body. So no platform, only the leadership of Netanyahu. And in 2015, he wins the election, as always against the polls, against even the exit polls. And people went to sleep with Herzog as the next prime minister, the current president of Israel, and woke up with Netanyahu staying in power. And then Netanyahu had to choose between, once again, building a unity coalition with Herzog, who would be a very, very convenient coalition partner, as he is now as president, working with the prime minister and practically nominated by Netanyahu, and between a pure right-wing coalition. And he negotiated with both sides, and he chose the right-wing coalition with Naftali Bennett, who was back then, he was the far right in Israel. And at that time, Bennett was trying to outflank Netanyahu from the right. See how the wheel is turned. And even Lieberman did not like to join the coalition. He joined it later as defense minister. And these things were unthinkable at the time. And when Netanyahu took over with the right-wing coalition, his aim was not to kill the two-state solution, although President Obama was still in office. His aim was to come back to his old plan of replacing the elites, changing the conversation in Israel, changing the direction of the country. If you go back to 1996, after he was first elected, he gave an interview to my then colleague Ari Shavit, in which he laid out the way Israel should be in his vision. And his main argument, which also recalled in his books at the time, was that the main threat to Israel was the Western support for Arab nationalism and for Palestinian nationalism in particular. And the worst thing within Israel is that Israelis give credit to the support of Palestinian nationalism. And that enabled Oslo, the disaster of Oslo in his eyes, because people were trying to imitate the liberals in the West, adopted the Western liberal discourse, brought it into Israel, which was wrong and bad for the country. But the way to change that, from Netanyahu's viewpoint, was not just to win the election, but to change all the other institutions in society. The media, first and foremost, the military leadership, the intelligence community, the academic speech, all of them he saw as defeatist and trying to follow the West that does not really support Israel, but seeks to destroy it or to minimize it. At that time, it was seen, replacing the elites was seen as a faraway dream. But in 2015, Netanyahu came back to the same idea, and he appointed Miri Regev, the former military spokesperson and chief censor, as the Minister of Cultural Affairs, which is not the most important portfolio in Israel in terms of budget allocation and so on. But it's highly symbolic. And what Regev said was that we have the state should not, in Israel you have public support for cultural institutions, theater, visual arts, music, and so on. You should not support cinema, and the state should not support any group or any institution that's not loyal. We have the freedom of funding, as she called it. And only one theater was closed in Israel. It was an Arab theater in Haifa, Al Midan. It was the smallest theater in Israel, and it was blamed for being less than patriotic and supporting terror. And they found some mismanagement in its budget, and it's shut down, approved by the Supreme Court, even after Regev left office. But that was enough for the other theaters to get the line. And when she forced them to perform in the settlements in order to get the full funding, they did. But there's no longer any criticism of the system from Israeli theater, from the established theater. The days when theater was radical in Israel were long gone. And even before that, the previous governments had the boycott law and the Nakba law, trying to minimize any support from within Israel to external boycott and to oppose any Palestinian group or city council or other institution that gets public funding from commemorating the Nakba, the catastrophe of Palestinian Arabs in 1948. In 2018, the Netanyahu government made its highest achievement in its view, and that was the basic law. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and only the Jewish people. And that law says that only one group in Israel, only Jews, have collective rights as a group. And it says that the state should support new Jewish settlements all over the state, but not non-Jewish. That Hebrew is the only official language. And this, you can say, this was symbolic. And the Knesset was divided. The coalition, the right-wing coalition, supported the law. The opposition from the center all the way to the Arab parties opposed the law. And I think this was a watershed moment. And after that, shortly after that, Lieberman left the government, the coalition collapsed, and everything was stopped on its tracks. But the nation-state law was important because it said that Israel is a Jewish state and democracy is second. And any effort, even by a few people from within the coalition, to add a clause of equality into the nation-state law, to say that only the Jews have collective rights, but all Israeli citizens should be equal, that was firmly rejected by the right-wing coalition and by Netanyahu. And since then, it's off the law. And one of the arguments for passing this law was that the Supreme Court, which in Israel we don't have a constitution, as you know, and many rights that in many other states are enshrined in the constitution, in Israel depend on Supreme Court rulings. And the most important one is freedom of speech and freedom of the press. They only rely on the Supreme Court. And the right-wing argument was that the Supreme Court relies too much on human rights principles and civil rights principles rather than on the national identity. And the nation-state law could allow the Supreme Court in the future to rule that Jewish rights are predominant in Israel. And we wrote dozens of op-eds and editorials against the nation-state law, calling it racist and in many other names. Well, it didn't help; it passed. And then the coalition collapsed, and for 4 years, the process of changing the elites, of building this new first Jewish and second democratic Israel stopped on its tracks because of the political uproar, which happened because of right-wing politicians who had a fight with Netanyahu and defected to the other side and joined forces with the other side to bring down Netanyahu. It was first Avigdor Lieberman and his party, and then it was Gideon Sa'ar who lost the primary contest with Netanyahu within Likud and did not get any ministerial appointment after that. And last but not least, Naftali Bennett, who after the election of 21 decided to move to the other side and become the prime minister against and leading the Rak Lo Bibi, the no Netanyahu bloc or coalition. but it with the involvement of his wife and son in policy making, and with many other tricks and shticks by Netanyahu. So they were willing to give a chance to this coalition. But Bennett never had any serious vision for the country or for his own leadership or for what to do. Neither did Lapid. All they tried to do was buy time in office and hope for the best. But they failed. If their mission was to oust Netanyahu, they failed because even during the peak of the change government, as it was called, Netanyahu never lost his support base. And during that time, he was able to attract back a couple of politicians from Bennett's party, which eventually brought down the coalition. Now, the main idea of the change coalition was, let's put away the Jewish-Arab conflict, let's put away the Palestinian issue, and just deal with managing the country, passing the budget, reaching out for the first time to an Arab party, to Ram, the Southern Islamic Movement party in Israel, bringing it into the coalition, and showing kind of Jewish-Arab cooperation that never happened before. But it was not enough. In the end of the day, the conflict was there, and that was the main argument in the right wing against Bennett was siding with an Arab party and calling it the Islamic movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, supporters of terror, and so on, which was not entirely true. It was an Islamic party, but definitely not supporting terrorism. And but that was enough to demolish Bennett's party and to bring him down. And in the end of the day, the vote that brought down the coalition was a vote that very few people paid any attention to in the past. It's a kind of emergency law that enables Israel to give settlers in the West Bank full rights of Israeli citizens, the right to vote, the right to get government services, and so on, but not to their Palestinian neighbors living under the autonomy of the Palestinian Authority. This law apparently passed many, many years, every year, for over 50 years. Even I, as diplomatic correspondent, never heard of it, never covered the vote. It was just an afterthought. But then for the first time, it came to a vote and it had no majority, because Netanyahu, as leader of the opposition, decided to vote against anything the government says or does. And after several votes in which the left-wing Haaretz and even the Arab Party voted for the citizenship law, which forbids marriages and naturalization of Palestinians through marriage to Arab citizens in Israel. But that was the watershed. Two Arab members of the coalition refused to support it, and Bennett decided to resign and to call an early election. Lapid replaced him. Lapid had to spend his four months in office mostly to convince the public and his own coalition partners that he's a capable leader, coming from a background of as one of the top media personalities in Israel for many years, having served in the IDF magazine as a writer in his military service rather than special forces like Bennett or Netanyahu, or as former chief of staff like Barak or general like Sharon. People were afraid that he was not made for the job because of his lack of security credentials. And he had to convince people that he's capable, which I think he did. But his own coalition partners did not accept his leadership. Benny Gantz, the defense minister, spent his entire campaign against Lapid rather than against Netanyahu. The anti-Netanyahu bloc was never really a bloc because you had fierce right-wingers there like Gideon Saar and Zev Elkin, and Ram and Haaretz on the other side. That was not enough for Netanyahu to win. And Netanyahu, when he began the campaign, he was not sure what to do, and he tried to be more centrist than he used to. Now, there's an axiom in Israeli politics. When the election is on the economy or domestic affairs, Likud loses. When the election is on security or Jewish-Arab relations, Likud wins. And this is exactly what happened here. For 4 times, Netanyahu could not win the election, especially in the last 3 times. At first, he thought he was winning, but then Lieberman defected. But for the past 3 times, he did not win the election. He did not exactly lose, but he did not win the election. And the last time he lost because people were fed up with the lockdowns. They did not like his COVID policy at all. They did not like his personality cult. And therefore, enough Likud voters stayed at home rather than come to the polling stations to keep him either restricted, having to side with Gantz, or out of office. But that changed because once again, security, personal security, law and order, and Jewish-Arab relations came to the fore. And that was an aftershock of the May 21 events in the mixed towns in Jaffa, in Lida, in Acre. Jews and Arabs fought each other. Not many people were killed, but the aftershock was devastating. And for many years now, the far-right argument in Israel has been, and now the Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich represented in the government, but before that it was Bennett and others. The argument was that Jews and Arabs in the end cannot live together. And when they do, you see what happened in Lida, and the only way to prevent it is to use more force and to use more police and to over-police Arab neighborhoods, over-police Bedouin towns in the south, and so on. And Ben Gvir represented that argument. And when Bibi realized it, and he brought together Ben Gvir and Smotrich to the far-right party, siding with him, he was too shy to have his picture taken with Ben Gvir at the time. But as the campaign went on, he realized that this was his winning card. His unique selling point was not himself, but Ben Gvir, the rising star of the election. And no, the other side made enough mistakes. It could have ended in a draw, because the Arab party split, the jointly split, and Balad, the furthest Arab party, nationalist party, failed to enter the Knesset. That was a huge gamble, because I'm not sure they will be able to run again as Balad in the future. Meretz and Labor failed to unite because of the opposition of Michaeli, the leader of Labour Party. And Lapid was not strong enough to impose it in the same way that Netanyahu imposed unity in the right wing. And also for expediency, because for both Lapid and Labour, the disappearance of Meretz is good news. They have less competition, if there is anything to compete for. But you could not see Lapid working day and night to bring them together. He met the leaders of Labour and Meretz for 40 minutes at his home. Michaeli said no, and that was it. And now the problem is more profound, and of the left, and I'll expand on it a little later. But that was another mistake. And the other one was that Gantz fighting against Lapid and going from studio to studio to show that Lapid would never be able to put together a coalition, and is the only one in the no Bibi camp who could do it, and campaigning saying I should be the prime minister because of my security credentials, which was a euphemism to saying Lapid is not credible because he did IDF magazine when I was a paratrooper and I was the chief of staff and so on. So there was no unity in the other camp, and it broke apart. And even now, after the election, when Lapid called the opposition members together, he did not invite Hadash Ta'al, the Arab party, and Ram, the more moderate Arab party, failed to come and said, we're not part of the opposition. We'll vote with opposition or coalition as we see fit. So they're still trying to be kind of playing a balancing act, because they know that there will be votes when Netanyahu would need their votes, their support in the Knesset. But even to these parties, Lapid is not a leader. So Netanyahu now wins against a very fractured opposition. And even if they could have, and it ended in a draw, there would be a sixth election. There was no way that Lapid could put together a majority coalition, and not a single opinion poll showed that. So Netanyahu had the better hand in this game, and he won decisively. And I think it surprised many people when he was saying, well, maybe he'll win 61 seats out of 120, and he won 64, which is a credible majority. So one defeat was of the no Netanyahu bloc, which collapsed. The other was of the Israeli left. Now, the Israeli left is in a dilemma for several years, but it's stronger now. First of all, when Lapid and our editorials and other people told Meretz and Labor to unite because of the fear that one of them or both would not pass the bar to enter the Knesset, it was clear that their positions and the parties were less than popular. Otherwise, why would they fail to enter the Knesset? They did not have anything good to sell, because anti-clerical. If you go back to the old flags of Meretz when it was founded by Shulamit Aloni 30 years ago, it was for anti-clerical, which Lieberman and Lapid are more identified with this cause. They were for the two-state solution. They're not the only ones. They were for Jewish-Arab cooperation, the joint list, and even Ram did more in that direction. And I know of friends of mine in Tel Aviv, totally secular people, who voted for Ram, for the Islamic party, for a religious Muslim party, because they said this is really the party for change, this is really a new direction, Jewish-Arab cooperation and so on, which Meretz failed to do. They had 2 members out of 6, 2 Arab members in the outgoing Knesset. Both failed to be re-elected, and they have no Arab members. They have no members of Knesset at all. But even at the top list, the Arab members went further down. And even in socialism, the Labour Party, if you believe in social democracy, the Labour Party tried to position itself as the party of social democracy in Israel, but it's also not very popular. Neoliberalism is very popular in Israel, and the heroes of Israel today are high-tech entrepreneurs. When I was a kid, when you were asked what do you want to do as grown up, the kids would say a pilot, a fighter, I don't know, Mossad agent, and your mother would say, no, be a lawyer, a doctor. And today, the mother and the child say, high-tech entrepreneur. That's a bon ton. And Netanyahu brought neoliberalism to Israel with a vengeance. As prime minister, he became, both because of his reliance on ultra-Orthodox who live on government subsidies and on the support within Likud. The Likud support base relies heavily on the unionized workforce, the public utilities, the electric utility, the seaport utility, and so on, the airport utility. They're very strong in the Likud rank and file and the Likud party machine. So Netanyahu is far more socialist than he used to be in terms of giving of government handouts, and that's how he played the COVID policy. But still is identified with the American accent, with high tech, with neoliberalism, and it's very difficult to outflank him in that direction, which Bennett tried to do not so successfully. So Meretz lost its appeal, and I think the main dilemma for the Israeli left today is to what extent can you be, and I thought that tomorrow you have a panel on can Israel be both Jewish and democratic? Can you support the Jewish state and Zionism and also cooperation with the Arab minority? So if you want a more egalitarian state, then it has to be less Jewish. not only in terms of religion, but in terms of its national identity. And today, very few people in the Zionist left are willing to go that way. And if what you seek is kind of more conservative, in Israel, the left is the conservative side. It seeks to rely on strong state institutions, strong Supreme Court, strong military and intelligence leadership, strong public service. Then Lapid and Gantz represent this card and keep the Zionist ideology in a more egalitarian way than the right wing, because the right wing today stands for Jewish supremacy, more rights for Jews in the Jewish state. If you're familiar with the Pew survey of several years ago, in which they surveyed 5,000 Israelis, it's a huge sample. It's 10 times the regular sample in Israeli public opinion polls. I think 79% of respondents, which included Jews and Arabs, 79% of all respondents said that Jews should have more rights in a Jewish state. And that survey was taken in 2014. So you can argue that the Netanyahu coalition reflects that, and I think 96% of ultra-Orthodox and 95% or 92% of modern Orthodox Israelis, Jewish Israelis, supported that idea. And that's the ideal of this coalition. And for several years, what they did, and Netanyahu, was to argue against the Netanyahu trial, argued that the Netanyahu trial is a scheme by the bureaucracy, by the judicial system, to oust him, the deep state, and copying from the Republican American playbook. But then again, and I don't need to explain it to an American audience. You have two parts of society seeing very different realities. One half sees an accused defendant accused of corruption, of taking bribes, and the other side seeing a victim of a system that decided to take hold of the country and oust the political leadership. And I have no idea what Netanyahu would do to if he will try to end his trial through replacing the attorney general. There are legal ways to do that, or it would suffice with changing the atmosphere so that the system would be afraid to indict him, to convict him. I don't know. But clearly the Netanyahu trial was used as a political card by both sides. Now several of in the post-election shock, I saw two reactions on the losing side. Three reactions. One was, we're going to leave Israel. Well, as Lapid once wrote in one of his columns, that he traveled a long way in America and Europe, and he never saw a billboard saying, Israelis are wanted, high salaries will be there. So that was one reaction. The other was, Netanyahu is the new leader of the left. Why? Because in a coalition with Ben Gvir and the ultra-Orthodox and some of the far-right wingers within Likud, Netanyahu, remembering he's the guy from Rehavia, he's the guy from MIT, he speaks the liberal language, he cannot be as bad as his partners, which to him, by the way, is the best thing, because what Netanyahu likes most is to have the ability to play it both ways. Since he won the election, since the exit polls came and announced his decisive victory, his victory speech was back to the center. I'll be the prime minister of all Israelis and hugging the losers. And which, by the way, it's good always to reduce the demands and price of his right-wing partners. But now is the savior. And by the way, it's true blue Netanyahu, tried and true, to put out all these trial balloons of LGBTQ rights are out the window, and then the next day Netanyahu announced, I will be the protector of all these rights and nobody would get hurt. Smotrich saying no more soccer games on Shabbat. Next day, Netanyahu, no, Likud will take care of that and so on. So Netanyahu is now the protector of civil rights and the protector and the left-winger in the coalition. And the other idea was, some people argued, including former ambassador Dan Kurtzer, who wrote an op-ed for us, that Netanyahu should be given some kind of clemency or a very easy plea bargain to get off the trial and then build a more centrist coalition. Now, the fallacy of this argument is that if the trial should be ended for political reasons, then Netanyahu is right in arguing all along that it was done for political reasons to begin with. So I think that you should not play with this from the left, as politicizing the trial from the left is wrong, just as was politicizing it from the right. Now, what is the lesson here for Israeli democracy? It is going to change. The idea was that, it's still the same Netanyahu, and he always protected this and protected the Supreme Court and protected that. Forget it. We have a very radical coalition. We have the ultra-Orthodox controlling the budget. And even before the election, the extraction from Netanyahu, doubling subsidies for yeshiva students, and also kind of a formal end to the government demand that ultra-Orthodox schools teach math and English, and therefore prepare the boys for future work in the general economy rather than just being yeshiva students or relying on the rabbis and on government subsidies. To that he agreed even before the election. Now imagine with Aryeh Deri, the leader of Shas, as the Minister of Finance, that this is just the beginning. And clearly any argument about the drafting the yeshiva kids, the ultra-Orthodox, to the army, which is no longer so much in the discourse anyway, this I think would be formalized after that election. Now comes the legal reformists in the right. The legal reformists in the right basically would like to turn the Supreme Court into kind of a PR agent of the government, giving a legal stamp to cabinet decisions. By the way, in the same way that the same body operates across the Green Line, where Palestinians are allowed to appeal to the Supreme Court, but almost always would get the same answer, that the government was right, that the military was right, that the person was killed for the right reasons, and that no compensation should be given, and so on and so forth. So if it's so successful there, why not bring it back into the Green Line? And there are all kinds of formulas. I'm not a legal expert, and I think it's less important. What's important is that they would like to reduce the footprint of any criticism of the government. And again, I think the process is yet unclear, but as we know, Netanyahu stands trial for trying to manipulate the media. And again, I'm bringing you back to 1996 when he said, controlling the media, changing the media discourse is imperative to have a long-term rule in the country. Now, with the right-wing coalition, they will try to manipulate the media, and with the weak Supreme Court, the freedom of the press and freedom of expression would be reduced. Asylum seekers and refugees in Israel, even the change government was very heavy-handed, for example, towards Ukrainian refugees in Israel, and they refused. Israel canceled the visa waiver for Ukrainians, but even after the Supreme Court ruled for allowing Ukrainians in, the number of entry refusals grew up, as we just published the other day. That was in the change government with Shaked as Minister of Interior. Fighting the asylum seekers was one of the main cards of the right wing for several years in Israel. And now it's going to be back. And the same is true about imposing the Nakba laws and the boycott laws etc., on one hand, and on the other hand, making every effort to Israelize the settlements, not just passing the emergency rule that brought down the change government, but in many other ways too, legalizing the outposts, etc. And if the only card that Netanyahu would have is, I don't want to get the international community angry at me, I still need to work with the Biden administration and this or that, it may slow down several things, but the direction is clear. This is a right-wing coalition that is aimed at radical change in Israeli society and reducing civil rights, reducing criticism of the government, making loyalty to the Jewish state the prime issue. And we at Haaretz are going to have a hard time writing against it and lobbying against it. And I think this is the outcome of this election, and why this election is so momentous in Israel's history. There's never been, there were, it's not true that there were not racist parties in the coalition before. Moledet, the party of late General Gandhi, Chavam Zevi, was advocating deportation of Arabs from the Palestinians from the West Bank, transfer, as he called it. It was part of the coalition, but it was never a dominant part in the coalition. And it was restrained by leaders like Shamir and Sharon, who were far more conservative in their general outlook of life and of the country and of governance in particular. This is not the case with Netanyahu, who rides back to power as the victim of what he says described as persecution by the old elites, by the judiciary, by the media, by everybody else not agreeing with him. And now it's a day of revenge. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you touched on a lot of issues which we will deepen in the next day, in the next panels. I'll just ask a couple of questions and we'll go into the audience. I found it of course, you can hear that a lot, that Netanyahu is the last hope of the left. He is the leftist in this government. But I wonder if it's left or if we mean something else, and that's secular, because half of the governing coalition are ultra-religious and national religious parties, and he is seen as one of us in terms of the secular. And I think, can you imagine that there will be a few years, not the next election, but after a few elections, Israel will be at a stage where there is a broad secular right-left coalition on the one hand, and the religious and ultra-Orthodox on the other?
Well, anything. I think anything can happen. Look, Netanyahu is an anarchist. He hates any rule, any organization, anything that limits his power. Is not exactly pacifist, but he hates using force. And I think this was one reason why he stayed in office for so long, because people appreciate it. And he's an atheist. He never denied. He denies everything published about him. He never once denied when people said that he was an atheist. And he never says anything about God. And when he speaks of tradition and the Bible and so on, it's in terms of history and nation, the Jewish nation history and so on, not in terms of following mitzvahs. But politically, his supporters have always been the religious. So even if he is atheist, they don't care. And to him, they are better partners. If in the future, but the point is that when you ask, but then again, when you ask my left-wing friends, what would make them leave Israel? It's not the two-state solution or lack thereof. It's the fear of Medinat Halacha, of religious state, of not being able to drive on Shabbat or to have anything open, and being having the kids forced to study more religious studies and so on. So the idea is there that of the secular union. But then comes the Jewish-Arab issue, which plays to the right. And I think one of the achievements of Netanyahu as a politician was to move the ultra-Orthodox voters, if not the rabbis who are weak today. There are no longer the strong rabbinic leaders of the Litaim, like Rav Shach, like Steinman, like Eliashiv. They're gone. Like Ovadia Yosef in the Sephardi community, they're gone. So what we have today is ultra-Orthodox voters who are very nationalist, because Jewish supremacy plays to them naturally. And what Netanyahu's achievement was to bring together the ultra-Orthodox voters and the more modern Orthodox and secular right-wing voters to one bloc, which is difficult to break apart. Most secular or many secular right-wing politicians defected from Netanyahu, but it wasn't. And you can argue that the change government, with the exception of Bennett, was very secular. The ultra-Orthodox parties were out, but it can take a while, and it depends on it's one thing to have more budgets and more rights to the ultra-Orthodox and more autonomy, and it's another thing to impose ultra-Orthodox values on general society.
And I'll just ask one more question before turning to all of you. Since the talk was about the elections in the future, do you see any future way that not even saying the left wing, which is like really been dwarfed, but the center and center left maybe, and even center right and center left together could come back, facing also the demographic issues, which I mentioned before?
Yes, look, the demography is not destiny. For 15 years at least, it's clear to anybody who watches Israeli society that the non-Zionist minorities, Arabic speakers, and ultra-Orthodox Jews are becoming more and more dominant. They dominate the elementary schools, and it's growing. And what we saw in recent years was not only the rise of the ultra-Orthodox, but also the rise of the Arab vote as a political force within Israel. The joint list peaked at 15 seats, and it was a considerable force in slowing down the Netanyahu revolution and in bringing the change government together, even if not all of them were part of it, and only Ram. And Netanyahu used it to split the joint list back to its smaller and less powerful components. But this old mainstream is shrinking, and that has been the case for many years now.
Okay, we'll open up as always. If there's students who have questions, you go first. Sophie. Please go to the mic. We have to go to the mic, everyone, because of the Zoom. Otherwise, the Zoom participants can see.
Sorry. Okay. Hi. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the lecture. But I guess we're looking at a time where democratic institutions are going to be tested. Are Israeli institutions in a place where they can effectively enforce democracy?
In what sense?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm thinking mostly about the Supreme Court trials and just general enforcement of laws. Like, they haven't necessarily been the best at doing so previously, but now with the new coalition, they're going to have to, presumably. But are they going to be able to withstand those types of tests, in your opinion?
it's a major test for the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is already changed by the Shaked appointments when she was Minister of Justice. And you know, the peak of the civil rights movement in Israel was about 30 years ago with the passing of the basic law of human dignity in the Knesset. And all kinds of Supreme Court rulings that were more liberal. And now it's turned back. To what extent will they protect basic civil rights? That would be the test. Regarding law and order, crime has become a political issue in Israel for the first time. It never happened before. And it was because the right-wing politicians, not only them, even the change government, its main domestic issue was the crime wave in the Arab society and how to reduce it. And they appointed the special deputy minister of police to deal with it and more budget allocation. So far it failed. For the right-wingers, and especially the Kahanists, this was the way to politicize law and order and make it into the new embodiment of the Jewish-Arab issue within Israel. So we're going to see a lot of focus on that, and a lot of the problems of civil rights would be with this new law enforcement by Ben Gvir and his supporters, and the court would have a very hard time to balance the need for law and order and civil rights.
And I see another student. And Zach, introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Einbinder Barkley. I am the editor-in-chief of Student Israelity, which is a nonpartisan student-run blog, which is under the umbrella of the Center for Israel Studies. My question to you is in regards to the Abraham Accords. Of course, this was a series of treaties, of agreements that were done under the Netanyahu government, but we see now with a lot of speculation as in who's going to be taking what ministerial post in the government, the Jordanians expressing a bit of a warning because they do have custodianship over the Temple Mount, saying that if someone, as in Ben Gvir, ends up getting the post, there could be, and there's some actions in the Temple Mount and there are serious consequences, there will be some sort of rebuke for that. So my question for you is, how do you see our relations, Israeli relations, with not only Jordan and Egypt, but with our new partnerships that we're seeing with the UAE, with Bahrain, with the Maghreb? How do you see these developing under this new government?
And you should add a renewed alliance with Turkey.
Of course.
I remember when Gantz ran against Netanyahu, he had these posters saying it's blue and white, Kahol Lavan or Erdogan, like Netanyahu was Erdogan. And then a couple of weeks ago, I saw the same Gantz hugging with Erdogan in Ankara. Look, clearly, the peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, or with Jordan first and foremost, with Egypt and the Gulf states and Morocco, would stand the test. Clearly, the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, is the hottest flashpoint of the conflict, and it's going to be even more so with Ben Gvir and Smotrich in power. The situation in the West Bank is very bad, even before Netanyahu coming back to office. Then I just had a briefing with a senior military official the other day. The statistics, awful. The number of incidents from both sides. Palestinian violence, settler violence doubled in 2022 compared to the year before. So the atmosphere is full of explosives, and it can explode. And clearly, keeping the peace treaties is the prime goal of the foreign policy of this new government, and this is why it's a big headache for Netanyahu. Not because he's a left-winger, but because he knows the importance of these treaties to Israel, and he even signed some of them. And this was his biggest achievement, was the Abraham Accords. I think in all his 15 years in office. Why lose them now? But just because he had bad coalition partners.
Yes. Right. Why don't you come up here, please?
Hi, thank you. My name is Danielle. I'm a graduate student here at the School of International Service. You alluded to this a little bit, but we're hearing a lot about, the disintegration of the PA, losing control of the Northern West Bank, Jenin and Nablus. What does the timing of this look like with this government coming in and the rising levels of violence in the West Bank? What will security cooperation continue to look like? And will there be any disruption there and a possible inflammation point?
It's look, the collapse of the PA is always one step away, and the PA president Abbas Abu Mazen is 87. There's no heir apparent, and the war of succession could be violent. The main problem that the military is referring to in the West Bank is the number of illegal weapons which are manufactured in the West Bank. They're not very precise. They're not as good as M16s for an infantry force, but they're enough to kill people and to disrupt any law and order. And again, according to the Israeli military, the PA lost most control in Jenin, but it's rebuilding control in Nablus. And security cooperation is going on in the rest of the West Bank. For how long, under what challenges, remains to be seen. But clearly, no government in Israel, regardless of its composition, would like to lose that cooperation and just let the PA go, regardless of what Smotrich is saying. And it's security in the West Bank and law and order within Israel are the two main challenges of any government, and this government in particular, because of the policies of its members.
Eran, do you want to come in? Maybe the others who want to ask questions can line up behind, so it will be a little easier. We have to do it for the Zoom.
So, Aluf, you didn't notice that here there's an elephant in this room, and you completely ignored it up until now, and that's Israel's relations with American Jewry. And you, as an influential Israeli, what would you say to American Jewry now for the next few years?
Wow, tough question. Look, liberal Israelis would like to reach out to like-minded American Jews and follow your example and have your support. We really don't have any other group of people to turn to at this moment, and it's difficult because of many reasons. The language barrier is just, generation by generation is growing. The experience barrier is growing. When my grandparents and the grandparents of my American cousins spoke Yiddish, now it's growing apart. Religion, Israeli seculars, as I say, Israeli seculars don't believe in the Reform God as well. And we see it at Haaretz. Whenever there's an issue of religious freedom, women of the wall, zero traffic in the Hebrew website, skyrocketing in the English website. So which means that that Israeli liberals should be more open and attentive to the problems of our cousins here, because we more often than not we see it as a one-sided kind of support, which we don't really know how to deal with.
think that you didn't answer my question, and here's why. And here's why, because I think what I had in mind is that there's going to be a rift that we really haven't seen before.
The rift is there, the rift is encouraged by Netanyahu. I remember for many years, liberal Jewish leaders coming from America, to meet me, or I meet groups and so on, and saying, if you do this and that, we will disengage from Israel. And I was taken by surprise by one of the direction that the Netanyahu revolution of 2015 took was to disengage from American Jewry, and arguing that this was Ron Dermer, the ambassador, arguing that the liberal Jews are going to assimilate anyway, so we have to rely on the Orthodox Jews and the evangelicals because they are growing. And this was unthinkable that Israel would disengage from American Jews, and the rift is going to grow apart. So, to whoever cares to bridge over that rift, like I think some people here, we must find ways to do that. But yes, culturally, Israeli Jews and American Jews are going different ways. Americanized Israelis that watch American TV or listen to American music and culture and so on, are not necessarily looking to the Jewish part of it. Yes, it's a long bridge to cross, and it's growing apart. And clearly, the new government is going to take that rift even further with such dominance of the ultra-Orthodox. I remember when several years ago, Moshe Gafni, the leader of Degel Torah, came to our democracy conference, and he asked me to interview him on stage. Not because I didn't really know him from before, but he had a message, and his message was that on peace and war, I agree with many people in this room, but one thing you shouldn't do is to support the Reform Jews. And the audience was taken by surprise because to them it was a non-issue. And to him, he spent 10 minutes explaining to why should Israel disengage from Reform Judaism. If you only supported Orthodox Judaism, we would side with you on peace and war, which wasn't exactly true. Yadut Torah never voted for any of these peace deals, save for the Abraham Accords. But to them, it's a major issue. And it's not so for the liberal side in Israel.
Yes, please.
Thank you for the incredible presentation. There's just
Introduce yourself.
Michael Poliner. I'm a neighbor, a friend of Laura Cutler. That's right. There's one point you made though that I didn't follow, just as a matter of logic and practicality, and that was your critique of Dan Kurtzer's concept of giving Netanyahu an off-ramp for the criminal prosecution to enable him to be as centrist as he's capable of being. And I think your critique was that if you let him off for political reasons, then you've proven that he's been prosecuted all along for political reasons, which doesn't follow as a matter of logic. And also the people who are going to say that are going to say it anyway. And if it has the beneficial effect that you're looking for, why not promote that? And why not?
But why would Netanyahu? Let's say Netanyahu gets clemency tomorrow from President Herzog. Okay, no trial, nothing. Why would he side? Why would the quid pro quo be a coalition with Gantz or Lapid? This is assuming that Netanyahu really wants a coalition with Gantz and Lapid, and only the trial and their support of him, and their opposition to join him as long as his stands trial is the barrier. I don't think so. He could take the clemency or the plea bargain and then still go with Deri and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
Well, if that was the only point that Kurtzer was making, then I don't recall his point correctly. But I'm talking more about just being centrist, not precipitating. I mean, he's capable of doing, we've seen virtually anything in order to avoid the eventual prosecution. We're worried about the Supreme Court losing its standing as an independent judiciary, all those sorts of things. Those are the things that he might be more willing to prevent if he's not being confronted with the criminal.
I agree, but if you say that the trial, but if you get him off the trial and you say that whoever has supreme political power should not be accused or can get away with corruption, then it's a problem. Then it's the end of prosecuting any corrupt politician in Israel. So that's a tragedy here. But I don't think that you could make any argument that just get him off the trial and then he would side with Gantz and Lapid. I don't buy it. And by the way, why would they agree to that kind of political acquittal as if the only thing they need is some judge signing or some legal document to get them back into the coalition? I don't think so.
I just wanted to ask a question. Oh, first of all, my name is Adam Levinson, and I'm a graduate student studying education, become a high school teacher.
My father taught at high school for 35 years, so good luck.
We'll see how the education industry treats me. So I want to ask a question related to Michael Brenner's question, and it's what's the threshold for the secular life being impacted by the Haredi influence on Israel? I mean, they don't want to be so involved in secular subjects. So at what point is it unsustainable to have this alliance between the right and the religious bloc?
In terms of what? In terms of preserving some sort of secular lifestyle in Israel? It's there are many aspects to that. Look, up until the election, the new light rail that's partly subway in Tel Aviv is about to start running next year. Up until the election, there was talk of operating it in Shabbat. And the argument was that if you really want people to do away with cars, then you have to have it 24/7. And now it's not going to be even written in op-eds anymore. Clearly, it's not going to happen. So they could say, okay, this is not changing the status quo. It's trying to look until the late 1980s. Israel was far more religious in its public sphere. When I was a kid, there were no cinemas open on Friday nights, on Shabbat, no stores, no shopping malls, nothing like that. The Russian immigration of the late 80s, early 90s changed, secularized the public face of Israel because you had an influx of 1 million people who were secular. Even those Jewish by any rabbinic law spent 74 years in the Soviet Union where there was no religious practice. So they came as seculars. So you had non-kosher butcheries and non-kosher restaurants. I don't know to what extent, and clearly it's not going to happen tomorrow. Over time, the religious bloc would try to take it back, to give non-kosher businesses to tax them and to get license problems and to have more rabbinic studies in secular schools, etc., etc. And clearly talk about civil marriages off the table, LGBTQ rights to the extent that achieved, they will try to take it back. Especially the far right leaders, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and their partner, the Noam Party, very homophobic. And at one point, they will try to. And now they're hiding this card because it's not popular even in the right wing bloc. But one day, they'll come back to the fore, and many other aspects of civil rights, which they don't like because it goes against orthodoxy.
Okay, I see two more lined up, and then I think we'll have to come to a close. So please.
Thank you so much for coming this evening. Thank you to the center for hosting this event. I'd just like to ask my name is Ryan Deitch. I'm a senior here at the School of International Service. I'd just like to ask, as somebody who works in media, one concern that I've heard just growing throughout the world, certainly in Israel, among other states, is just violence and sort of very violent rhetoric that is being waged against journalists, making the field a little bit more volatile. If you could just speak to that situation, and then more on the positive side, if there are any sort of positive developments on the ground in Israel, perhaps in the media or with civil society organizations in protecting a free and fair press.
Well, we try to raise that flag every day and every moment of free press. There's a lot of violent rhetoric, especially in social networks, against the media, from Netanyahu's side, calling the TV networks by ugly names, and so on and so forth, while using them for his campaign at the same time. There was hardly any physical attack on journalists in Israel. The killing of Shirin Abu Akleh in Jenin was not seen by the Israeli media as, she was not seen as one of us. And it was reported as if something happened to a foreign journalist in Kiev or something. So we're not there yet. I think that the main threat is trying to have more government control over the content through manipulation of government advertising, through licensing of TV channels, and so on and so forth, mostly to get the mainstream media to support the government. This is the main challenge.
And the last question.
Hi, my name's Eric. I'm a junior studying international studies here at American University. My question was more sort of about Iran. So we've seen historically Netanyahu not get along very well with Democrat governments here in the US. We've also seen Biden's Iran policy sort of shift. At the start of his administration, he tried very hard renewing talks for a peace deal. Now those are sort of disappearing. So do you see any eye to eye between the Biden administration and Netanyahu, any room for cooperation there? And also then with personalities like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in government, will that affect Netanyahu's ambitions to get any peace deal with Saudi Arabia? Thank you very much.
Regarding Iran, Netanyahu always plays either directly or through proxies with the rhetoric of bombing Iran, of preparing to go to war against Iran. This was also among the talking points of the change government. I don't see it coming because Netanyahu knows very well that regardless of who's at the White House or who's controlling Congress, Israel depends on the United States militarily. The Israeli Air Force cannot fly without American support, not to Iran, not to Syria, not anywhere. And there are areas where America allows Israel some freedom of action. The most notable example in the past year was the war in Ukraine, where Israel did not join the sanctions against Russia and did not join the NATO effort to send arms to Ukraine, even though the Ukrainian government asked for Israeli anti-drone and anti-missile systems. Israel refused, and it was not pressured by the Biden administration to change course. And on Iran, I don't think the deal with Iran is now on the table so much. So there's not much room for argument. And also personally, Biden gets along with Netanyahu much better than former presidents Clinton and Obama ever did. He knows how to deal with him personally. Regarding Saudi Arabia is now is confronting Biden. So I'm not sure that gives Netanyahu kind of partnership with them. Look, I'm not sure that Saudi Arabia is going to join the Abraham Accords. especially not with such far-right coalition in Israel. It might use some leverage on Israel to prevent any provocations in Al-Aqsa and so on. But I don't see peace with Saudi Arabia coming, or with Qatar. Although Qatar now allowed Israelis to fly directly to the World Cup games later this month for the first time. But even there, with Qatar and Israel, there's a lot of high-level and official-level cooperation going on, but not so much as to raise the Israeli flag in Doha. So I think that the Arab world, as everybody else around, is going to be very watchful of this coalition and not make any hurried moves to confront it. With one exception is the UN decision to refer the Israeli actions in the West Bank to the ICJ, which could be seen as kind of initial reaction to the right-wing victory in Israel. And as we recall from the previous International Court of Justice case with the barrier in the West Bank, that was initially taken as an afterthought by Israel, but then over time, as the case proceeded, it was a major headache for the Sharon government, and the Supreme Court at the time let it off the hook by forcing the government to change the route of the barrier. Will the new, more conservative Supreme Court give the government such leeway, or how this case would proceed? It's going to be a major headache for the new government, but that's just, this is the extreme part of the international community regarding Israel. The others would be watchful, as Erdogan said, that he's respecting the elections and so on.
Thank you so much for your lecture, for your answers, for your patience. Thank you so much for great questions, especially to our students. We will deal with many of those questions tomorrow with many experts from Israel, from America, and hopefully we'll see all of you here again. And you can follow what Aluf Benn has to say every day. So we'll see. Thank you, and have a nice
Thanks,
evening.
everybody.
Please return your pamphlets to the table outside. Thank you.